Hello, sixth graders. We are going to be reading today the chapter called Christmas Naciemiento, and it begins on page 170. Winter term classes began the day after Thanksgiving break, and field hockey ended. At last, I was playing soccer on those emerald fields. The day before Christmas break rushed by. It was a magical time, too. Mornings as I headed up the hill to clean room 24, I found the entire campus, trees, grass, and all encased in ice, sparkling with the first rays of sun. It was like being inside a glass dome full of snow. The last day before Christmas break, the chapel was aglow with flickering luminarios, and the altar was surrounded by rows and rows of red poinsettias. It was just like the picture I'd seen in the school brochure. We all sat down to a formal Christmas dinner with china, silver, and crystal, where we ate roast meats and mashed potatoes and ginger cake, and were entertained by the school's magical group. Then the headmaster stomped in, dressed as Santa Claus, saying, "Ho, ho, ho," and wishing everyone a Merry Christmas and giving out bags of cookies and chocolates. The next morning, Brooke and I exchanged presents. I gave her the novel 100 Years of Solitude, saying it would give her a taste of the magical. She gave me a book of poems by Emily Dickinson, saying it would give me a taste of the Northeast, home of the Big Three. Her family dropped me off at the bus station. Marcos and the other Valley students were flying home. I sat in the first row again. How wonderful to be going home, and for Christmas, the most magical time of the year. Then I remembered that I had to be the Christmas madrina. Would this teach me to connect with the dead, as Tia Petra had said? Before dozing off, I smiled, so happy that I'd received honors in all my fall term classes, and that we were now playing soccer. Brooke was hogging the soccer ball. Even so, she was nice and fun. I'd been over to her house a couple of times, and her family was warm and friendly. Marcos and I were good friends now, kicking the soccer ball almost every Saturday while practicing our Spanish. Sometimes Brooke played too. She laughed when we told her about Johnson's ropa usada and about my gorgeous green dress that she kept borrowing. I slept most of the trip. Papa, Mama, Lucy, Berta, and Noe were waiting at the station. After we kissed, Mama said, "We have to hurry over to the abuelitos to help with the nacimiento." Abuelita was wearing yellow rubber boots and gloves and standing beside an enormous pile of mud right in the middle of her living room. Her face, glasses, and braided hair were splattered with mud, and the floor was littered with twigs and leaves. "Ay, the Christmas madrina has finally arrived." Abuelita took her gloves off, stomped her boots on the tarp, and gave me a big hug. She started wiping off the mud. "I'm making a Mexican town, mija, with a big plaza. It's a replica of the town where my grandmother, who gave you the gift for mule kicking, met and fell in love with your great-great-grandfather, who gave Berta the gift of those big choppers of hers. First, we'll make a 4-foot mountain with sprouting tiny trees. We put pots of cacti, rosemary, and red poinsettias on a plank and cinder block structure, and then filled the spaces with buckets of mud. As we worked, Abuelita told the story of how our great-great-grandparents met. My grandfather lived in a tiny town in Mexico, up on the hill in a 2-room house. When I first visited, I was stunned at how small the house was, and I couldn't believe that 6 people lived there. But what struck me most was how everyone was always so calm and got along. It was because of the town plaza. Once we finished the mountain, we helped Abuelita create a town using blocks of styrofoam and wood and painted to look like adobe houses, a church, shops, and even a cantina. There were miniature benches and a fountain and a pink gazebo for the plaza. Abuelita continued. The townspeople gathered at the plaza every evening. They sat on wooden benches, strolled, gossiped, told stories. I remembered Clara explaining how tales were first told in plazas. Some sold flowers or fruits from their gardens, or small toys they'd carved, or squares of flan they'd made fresh that day. Others came with guitars and sang songs about love and broken hearts. And this was where the recipes and remedies were exchanged, where pictures of babies, quinceañeras, and brides, as well as the dead, were passed around. And that's where you, Sophia, Berta, Lucy, and Noe were conjured up too, for that's where my grandfather and grandmother first met and fell in love. She was 15 and had gone to visit her tia Paula. As was the custom, all girls in the town started walking around the plaza in one direction, while all the boys walked in the opposite direction. He was 18, quite handsome, and was carrying a big blue balloon attached to a long stick. On the first turn around the plaza, she came face to face with him and his balloon. They smiled at each other. On the next turn, there he was again, now holding only the long stick because his balloon had popped. And on the third turn, he bowed to her and handed her the long stick with a piece of balloon still attached to it. Once the town was finished, Abuelita reached into her pocket and pulled out a blue balloon. Here, Lucy, please blow this up, mija. It's to honor the love of your great-great-grandparents. Abuelita tied the balloon to a long stick and stuck it inside the plaza. Now it's time for the merienda of coffee and churros. As we sat at the kitchen table, Mama said, "What this barrio needs is another fancy TV channel or new 7-Eleven or even Walmart. No, what it needs is a plaza. Just an open space where the comadres can gather in the evenings to talk, look, gossip, and where young people can meet, just like in Abuelita's story. I once heard that if you put too many cats in a house big enough for only 1 or 2 cats, the cats eventually go crazy and turn violent. That's exactly what's happening to our barrio. Before, there was no plaza, but it was nice then, with just our one-family houses all around. The kids played games in each other's yards, kickball in the alley, soccer in the street. Abuelita said, it was one big family with everyone knowing each other and everyone pitching in and looking after each other's kids. The old ones were always telling tales and stories. And when they died, the family would lay them out on the table in the sala and retell their tales until it was finally time to plant them in the ground. Now apartments are taking over." I said, "Oh, but it still feels so good to be home." On December 21st, we all gathered at Abuelito's house. Abuelita had added a wooden jackal to the plaza. It was made from pieces of mesquite and had a ceramic Mary and Joseph, each about a foot high and badly chipped and faded, kneeling before an empty cradle. 10 cardboard boxes marked El Nacimiento stood where the tarp and mound of mud had been. After a cup of frothy Mexican chocolate and a handful of pan de polvo cookies, each star, bell, and angel sprinkled with crystals of sugar and freshly ground cinnamon, Abuelita carefully opened the first box. It was filled with balls of old newspaper. I wondered what pieces I would find. Year after year, each of us selected a ball, unwrapped it to discover the piece inside, and went to Abuelita, who stood in front of the Nacimiento like a conductor before a symphony. She would take the piece, examine it through her thick eyeglasses, and then tell us where to put it. The Nacimiento, if you don't know, is the nativity. So you can see on the screen that I put a picture of the manger with the wise men and the baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph. That's what they're talking about when they say the Nacimiento. Each piece had its own story about who had given it to her. A piece might make the Nacimiento one year, but not the next. It depended on how Abuelita was inspired to decorate the Nacimiento that year. The only pieces she put out herself were those of Mary and Joseph. They were the oldest. Abuelita took Mary in her hands. She traced her face, her veil, her entire outline with her long fingers. This piece makes me feel as if my mother and grandmother are right in the room with me. It makes me feel like a little girl again when I was helping them to create the Christmas Nacimiento. I've since discovered that creating the Nacimiento isn't work, really, even when it takes weeks, for it's a gift of sacredness to the baby, to the whole family. I unwrapped one ball and laughed. The gray ceramic elephant with the pink saddle. I'd chosen it in other years. Now that, Abuelita said, belongs to one of the 3 magi. Put it at the very bottom of the hill, for the 3 magi aren't coming for a while. The next piece I unwrapped was a lime green plastic dinosaur with a long, goofy neck. This used to be my favorite, but now it seemed only gaudy and silly. Did it really belong in the Nacimiento? But it was also one of Abuelita's favorites, a gift from Mama and when she was just a little girl. Abuelita said, "Put that right next to Mary, just outside the jacal with its long neck peeking in." So as you can see in this picture right here, this is more of a traditional manger scene. The one that Abuelita is making has a ceramic elephant and it has a dinosaur, right? But each of the pieces mean so much to her. So even though it might look silly, it has so much meaning to the family. And that's how it went for hours, box after box. There must have been more than 70 angels, some flying, others kneeling or sleeping, and many with chipped wings and cracked faces, and 3 with no heads at all. There were hundreds of animals, pigs and ponies, storks and camels, even a pink flamingo and a big ceramic whale that went in a pool of wadded up blue plastic. I don't know about you, I've never seen a manger scene with a whale in it. There were the usual shepherds, about 30 of them, and the 3 magi, one a foot high, the second 5 inches, and the third the size of a thimble. A thimble is something you use for sewing, and it's less than an inch tall. So the magi, or the wise men in this case, are all different sizes. So again, it adds to the idea that this is a very unique looking Naciemiento, or manger scene. There were 12 plastic mariachis, each equipped with a tiny violin, horn, or guitar, a huge ceramic cantinflas with his pants falling down, chomping on an onion, as well as a bobbing head of JFK and a hula dancing Hawaiian girl in a bright grass skirt. There were cut-out pictures of Maria Felix, Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata, and the Virgin of Guadalupe. And then there were the inexplicable, 2 big stuffed green frogs, one playing an accordion, the other a trumpet, as well as bottle caps, glass marbles, maracas, Mexican jumping beans, tiny piñatas, plastic whistles, cardboard dolls in acrobat outfits, a dried up pomegranate, an enormous lollipop with a tequila worm inside, and another tequila worm and a tiny bottle of mezcal. There were rocks and shells and paper flowers and bows and all kinds of Mama's wacky handmade things too. Abuelita added big yellow pineapple, 5 red apples, 3 oranges, half a dozen green chiles, and a handful of cinnamon sticks and walnuts. Then we put wisps of angel hair here and there and everywhere. Abuelita disappeared behind the mountain, and hundreds of tiny lights, red, yellow, green, and blue, winked on to sparkle throughout the mountain, town, and plaza. Every piece came to life. Hold on, I'm going to get some water. Okay. Over another cup of hot chocolate, but this time with crispy cinnamon-covered buñuelo. We all sat around the Naciemiento, and Abuelita told stories of how her grandmother and then her mother had created the Naciemiento each year. Sometimes it was Bethlehem or a Mexican village, once a lush African jungle with wild animals and exotic plants. Often it took weeks to finish. I shook my head. How tired I was just from putting the pieces out. Before we left that night, Abuelita took me aside and handed me a small bag made of white satin. Here, mija, love him like he's your own baby. When I unwrapped it at home, I found a mended, glued, badly chipped ceramic baby Jesus. Mama said, your great-grandmother gave him to your grandmother when she was appointed the Christmas madrina the very first time. The next morning I called Berta. Comadre, I need your help. The doll is falling apart. Do you think we can find a tiny dress at Johnson's Ropa Usada? Mama walked in. Sophia, hang up. I need to talk to you now. Berta said, Oh, Sophia, you're in trouble. Yes, Mama. Sit down. Oh, no. I heard you talking to Berta. This is no joke. Being the Christmas madrina. If you can't take this seriously, tell your abuelita right now. You are representing the whole family, Sophia. But Mama, I wasn't. Remember how your papa makes his beans sacred by how he cleans and cooks them? Yes. We'll start there. What do you mean? Make this so-called doll your baby by cleaning and gluing him back together, carefully and thoughtfully. This is not the pantyhose baby, Sophia. But what about the diaper, the dress? Here, Mama pulled a square of white satin and another of purple from a bag. Use this. She left as Lucy and Berta walked in. Are you in the doghouse? Asked Lucy. That means, is she in trouble? Sort of. Oh, you should have heard her on the phone, Lucy, saying she wanted to buy a tiny dress for Jesus at Johnson's and, well, I wasn't joking, but now I get how this experience is going to teach me to connect with the dead. I'm going to join them. Berta and Lucy started laughing. Shh, Mama's going to flip again. So how can we help? Said Lucy. Well, get me some glue and a towel. I'll get a big bowl and soap. Let's bathe him and then glue him up. After the baby Jesus was all clean and freshly glued and sweet smelling, we took him over to Berta's house and started making his new diaper and dress. Berta and Lucy measured, traced, cut, and sewed while I counted buttons, picked up pens, and fetched whatever they wanted. I also talked to the baby, telling him funny stories about Berta and Lucy. That night, he slept on my pillow. I became so attached to him that I wanted to take him back to school with me. How strange to feel about such an enormous affection for a doll. After Misa de Gallo on Christmas Eve, we gathered for a prayer in front of the Naciemiento, and I placed the baby Jesus in the mesquite cradle. He was wearing his new white satin diaper. We sat around the glowing Naciemiento, our plates piled high with Mama's pork-filled Christmas tamales. We ate bowls and bowls of hot, hearty menudo. On the 6th of January, we gathered again at the Naciemiento. After Abuelita placed the 3 magi at the manger, along with their steeds, the chunky elephant, a red camel, and a pink plastic horse, we said another prayer, and then I took the baby Jesus and carefully dressed him in the new purple satin dress. I walked around the room and presented him for everyone to kiss. Later we feasted on pozole and took turns cutting a slice from the pan de rosca, shaped like a king's crown and sparkling with jewels of candy fruit. That night, I found it hard to leave baby Jesus behind. I also felt strangely comforted by this ritual, which seemed mad at first. With the mountain of mud and the 1,000 strange pieces. It was somewhat like Clara and her bag of things and stories, except the Naciemiento seemed to conjure up not only long-gone relatives, but also the sacred, the holy, something I never experienced at St. Luke's. Mija, Papa said before bed, that little Naciemiento conjured up baby Jesus. I feel his peaceful presence everywhere. So when I'm gone, remember to conjure me up by sitting down and cleaning a pound of pinto beans for me, just like we always do. I laughed and then kissed him goodnight. I want you to think about that, what Papa just said. When I'm gone, remember to conjure me up before sitting down and cleaning a pound of pinto beans. And then in the chapter before this, Papa was looking thin and a little not the healthiest. So I want you to think about those clues as we go into the next chapter.